Hello, Bookstack. Thanks for joining me as we discuss Chapter 13 and 14 of How to Read a Book. Hey, Bookstackers, thanks for joining me this week. Sorry I missed last week. We've had a lot going on. I meant to post a video, let you guys know that I wasn't going to be able to post a video that week, full-length discussion of the book. Just had a lot happening, a lot going on. I appreciate you guys being patient with me. And hopefully you guys are still locked in and still learning as much as I am from this book. And let's get started with Chapter 13 on reading practical books. Now, we just started the next section where he starts talking about how to read different types of books. And the first one he talks about is practical books. Now, he says that you really need to be flexible when it comes to applying the rules we've been learning to the different types of books. Of course, the rules we've been learning are good in general, but he's kind of now drilling down to get into specific types of books and how these rules apply to those types of books. And the first one we're dealing with is practical books. And he says practical books can really be broken down into two different types of practical books, ones that are more theoretical, ones that talk more about principles, and others that really drill down and get into specific details in the rules. And so as we're reading, we need to make sure that we know the difference between the two, because rules are going to give us steps to take in order to accomplish a goal, whereas the principles, we're kind of getting the idea behind them. Now, books that focus on rules can be very helpful in specific given situations, but sometimes you'll encounter a situation where you don't have a particular rule to help you in dealing with this particular situation that you're in. But the books that focus more on principles, they're more general, so you can kind of rely on those principles in order to get at what it is you should do in a given situation. So there's those two type of expository books that are explaining things, and if you're reading a book that's giving you a lot of rules, you should really kind of zone out a little bit or zoom out a little bit in order to get at the principles, the underlying principles that the author is getting at. But you also need to make sure when you're reading one that focuses on principles that you can also kind of think of some rules in your head to kind of help guide you and govern you. Now, he says one thing you really want to keep in mind in dealing with expository books, practical books, is that they cannot solve their own problems. Now, theoretical books, he says, can solve their own problems. They state a question, they present the research, they present the formula or the formulae, however you want to say it, and they can kind of solve their own problems. But when you're dealing with practical books, the only thing that's going to solve that particular problem is action. So practical books, expository books that explain what it is you should be doing, they should result in action. If not, there's really no sense in actually reading practical books. Now, there's two methods of judging practical books to make sure that they are good practical books. And one is that the means stated are correct. In other words, how he says you should accomplish your task makes sense, and that you say can agree that they're right, and you can see how they would work. And also the goal that he states you should or she states you should be accomplishing. And so you don't want to necessarily take steps to reach a goal that you don't agree with. So the two main things we're really concerned about when we're dealing with practical books is the methods and means stated in the book telling us how to accomplish the task, and the task that the author is saying that we should accomplish. And this is really where the kind of personality of the author kind of comes into play, becomes important, because if you have a different personality than the author, he may be giving you steps that you may not be comfortable with. He may have goals and ends that you may not be comfortable with. So it's a really important thing to understand how the personality of the author kind of plays into the steps and the advice that he's giving you, and the goals he says are important for you to accomplish. So the next part, he starts talking about the role of persuasion. And again, what is the author saying that we should be accomplishing, and how is he saying we should be accomplishing it? Now, he's going to try to convince us in the book that we should accept his goal as a worthy goal. So he's going to have some persuasion in there. And the thing is, we really want to make sure that we're understanding that's what's happening as it's happening, because propaganda can be very dangerous, but it only becomes insidious when it is hidden and we don't know that what's happening is that we're being propagandized or we're being persuaded. So we really want to watch out for that, because what happens is an author can try to speak to our heart without first traveling through our mind, and that to take the mind out of the decision-making process and the judgment of the goal is really a dangerous thing. We don't want to get so hyped up and emotional that we lose our thinking and our ability to think logically and work through a problem. So make sure that you understand what's happening as it's happening, that you keep your wits about you, and understand that he's trying to persuade you into his goal. He's going to throw a lot of things at you to say, you know what, my goal is the best goal. You should do what I'm telling you to do. And not to say that his advice isn't good, but we just want to make sure that we are not assenting to his advice based on our emotions. We're doing it because logically we know, truthfully, that it's the right thing to do. Because this is the best way to really guard ourselves against propaganda, is to just recognize it for what it is. Because if not, it can be like a drug that we don't know we're taking. Sometimes when you have animals, you have things called pill pockets, and you can take their medicine that they need to take and take it, put it in this little pill pocket, and you give it to them, and they don't even know they're taking the medicine. And later on, they're having these effects, and their stuff's happening, and they don't really understand what's going on and why it's happening. You know, there's a lot of confusion there. So that can sometimes happen with propaganda. You find yourself feeling and thinking things without really having any explanation as to why you're thinking them or why you're feeling them. But sometimes when you're challenged on them, why do you feel so strongly about this? Or what is it about this that upsets you? Or what makes you really excited about this thing? If somebody asks you that question, if you don't have the ability to answer and explain yourself, you're probably being subject to a propaganda and you just didn't know it. So the next section, he says, you know, what does agreement entail when you're reading a practical book? And we've kind of talked about it. All right, we're finding out what is the author saying we should do, what's his goal, how does he say we should accomplish those goals, and what of it? I mean, the next thing is, what does this lead to? Once we know this, okay, author, we agree with your goal. Author, we agree with how you say we should accomplish this goal. Now what do we do? Obviously, the thing to do is to act, to get out there and do what the author has told you to do. Now, sometimes it doesn't lead to action. You can sit here and read this book, in fact, and say, you know what, I agree that I should be reading analytically, and I agree with how he says I should be reading is the way I should be reading. It would accomplish the goal of reading analytically, and then you just don't do it. What you really have to ask yourself, am I just being lazy? Probably not. Probably what's happening is you don't truly think that, either you think that reading analytically is not a worthy goal, something that you should not be doing, or you say, you know what, I think the steps that he's saying is too much, I shouldn't have to do all that in order to read analytically. It's going to be most likely one of those two things. So either your motives are going to be incorrect, or you're saying that you agree with what the author's saying, but truly you don't, if you think that you agree and it doesn't lead to action. So that's the whole point of a practical book, is to make sure that you understand what the author's trying to get you to accomplish, understand how he says you should accomplish those things, and then allow it to change you and cause you to act in accordance with what the author's saying, if in fact you agree with what the author's telling you to do. So that's really kind of my thoughts there on chapter 13, reading practical books. The next one we're going to move into is chapter 14. So chapter 14 deals with reading imaginative literature. Now, the biggest thing between, obviously, expository literature, expository works, and imaginative literature is going to be its aim, its goals. Expository works really aim to inform, and they want to convey knowledge, whereas imaginative literature truly wants to communicate an experience. And how do we have experiences? We have it through our senses. But when we're reading something that, we're obviously just looking at words on a page, we're really engaging our imagination. And this isn't to say that expository works don't engage our imagination, or our logical brain and our imaginative brain are completely separate and they're two different things. No, they totally work together. But we have to understand that we need to open ourselves up to a work of literature in a way we don't necessarily open ourselves up to a work of exposition or practicality that is trying to teach us and convey knowledge. So we need to open ourselves up, and really the rules of reading imaginative literature are really to try to remove all barriers of feeling ourselves into the story as deeply as we possibly can. Now this really leads to another difference or a separation between expository works and imaginative literature, and it's the use of language. Expository works, practical works, are really precise in their use of words, in the sense that they really mean only one thing when they use the words. Now that doesn't mean that when you're writing imaginative literature that the words aren't precisely used, and sometimes in imaginative literature it's very important precisely which word is used, but it often is used for its multiple meanings and its multiple layers that it adds to the work itself. Sometimes when you're reading imaginative literature, the everything taken together, the words in themselves and the ideas they convey are actually bigger than simply the words and the sentences and the paragraph on the page. And so we want to make sure that we're experiencing the whole range of idea, thought, and emotion that the author is intending for us to experience as we're reading the work. So then we move into the general rules we have for reading imaginative literature, and we have some structural rules. First, what kind of imaginative literature are we reading? Is it a play? Is it a poem? Is it a novel? Is it meant to be slightly autobiographical of a fictional character? Is it historical fiction? What type of literature is it that we're reading? And so then we want to understand the unity of the story, and the unity of a story is found in its plot. So if I were to say, hey, what's this book about? You would give me the plot. So that's really the unity of the story. And this is a lot of times why it's important to read stories quickly. I know some people who take months just to read one single book, and it's understandable if it's a very long book to take a little bit longer, but you want to get through it as quickly as you can so you don't lose that unity. Again, we've talked about this before. You don't want to get so bogged down on a part that you miss, you don't want to catch the tree and miss the forest. So you want to make sure that you're seeing the whole thing that the author has put together for you. And so the next thing, you want to make sure that you're breaking down the different pieces and see how they fit into the overall plot. And these are really the kind of the structural things that allow us to experience a book as deeply as we can. So next we have some interpretive rules for reading fiction. Again, these are just meant to be guideposts to help you along the way and to allow you to experience a book as deeply as you can. So the next thing, you want to be familiar with the characters of the book. You want to be familiar with their thoughts, their ideas, their habits, their personality. Then the next, you really want to be familiar with the world in which this character is found. The background, the scene, is it in the mountains? Is it in the forest? Is it on the beach? Is it in the desert? What's the background like? And then you kind of want to put these two together and follow the character through the scene on their adventures. You want to travel the highways. You want to taste the food. You want to smell the smells. You want to hear the music, in using your imagination, experiencing this book as deeply as you possibly can. So what are some guides for critiquing a book? And kind of issuing our thoughts on a particular book. Now, it's going to be difficult to criticize the materials that an author uses. In other words, his world, his background, his character. The names and things aren't necessarily as important. So kind of how he sets up something isn't necessarily what we're criticizing, but it's how he uses the different elements themselves and puts them together. We're really trying to judge the beauty. We want to make sure we understand what the author's trying to do, and truly want to understand what the author's trying to make us experience. The author's trying to convey an experience to us, and we have to kind of determine how well we experience it. What's the feelings that we get when we know the work very well? So those are the kind of the realm of where we want to really kind of place our critique is, I grant you your world, I grant you your character, I grant you your literary style. How well do you use them to convey this experience to me? And that's really kind of where you're going to sit as far as the issuing your critique and whether or not you enjoyed or liked the book or not. So when you're judging a book, you really kind of want to move away from what is good and bad in a book and why, and really move into what you liked and disliked in a book and why. I read books that have frustrated me and made me upset and angry, and sometimes it's just because, the plot didn't work out the way I wanted it to. But oftentimes these authors that do that to me, what they're writing is more analogous to real life. And so sometimes that just frustrates me because I want, the hero to win, and I want everything to be fine and okay, and I want all the questions to be answered. But when I really sit down and objectify it and say, I didn't like that, and then I think about why, because it reflects real life, it really makes me flip it around and say, I guess I can't not like it because it reflects real life. That's what the author's trying to make me experience, and I understand that's the experience he's trying to give me. And so therefore I then say, I have to like it. I did like it because what the author is trying to make me experience, he did, and he did it well because I truly felt it, or else I wouldn't be frustrated. If I didn't feel what the author's trying to make me feel, I would be upset and mad. He's making me upset and mad through the construct and the plot and how he made things work out. So you really need to sit down and say, what did I like about this book, and why did I like it, and what didn't I like, and why didn't I like this particular thing, and really analyze that. And this will allow you to develop a taste for literature it will, you'll say, you have a good taste, or you have a good idea of what good literature is, and this is how you begin that process of developing your taste for literature. So that concludes my thoughts for chapter 14. So today we went over chapter 13 and 14. I hope you guys really liked it. We're going to be moving through these other works of literature, the different types, in the coming weeks. And so I'll keep you guys updated on that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with your friends and family, and I'll catch you in the next video.